Strand, we're out of time. The council moved the date forward. The words struck like a weapon. Commander Ivo Strand didn't look away from the shifting streams of intercepted tribunal data filling the chamber. His jaw tightened as he traced the coded directives that condemned Earth without trial. Cold sweat stung his forehead, and the taste of iron rose in his mouth as he bit the inside of his cheek to keep steady. Around him, the dimly lit room smelled of damp insulation and old circuits, the underground hub where Earth's intelligence division had hidden its most dangerous listening posts. His hands curled into fists on the table as the truth crystallized. Humanity was already marked for erasure. Dreven Holt leaned against a rack of machinery, grease staining his fingertips from hours of coaxing their signal interceptors to life. His voice carried a nervous rasp, always a shade too blunt, but unflinchingly honest. They're not even going to let us speak. They've categorized us as an emergent threat. They'll sterilize Earth the same way they did with the Kron worlds. Quiet, efficient, and by the time the smoke clears, there won't be anyone left to protest. Strand pushed back from the table, boots scraping the concrete floor, and crossed the cramped chamber with purposeful strides. His eyes, sharp and unflinching, swept over Holt and the others. Rurik Van stood rigid near the entrance, arms folded, a man built for violence who kept it caged behind controlled breathing. Eldenmar hunched near a comms panel, pale from sleepless nights, fingers twitching over a relay pad, as though, even in exhaustion, his mind still reached for signals. They think we're too fractured, too unprepared, too insignificant to defend ourselves, Strand said, voice low, words carved with steel. They've miscalculated. Eldon raised his head, blinking against the harsh glare of the displays. You're talking about walking into the trial itself? That's suicide. Delegates from every empire, their fleets orbiting in high guard. They'll crush us before we reach the chamber doors. His throat tightened as he spoke, the dryness in his mouth betraying fear he couldn't hide. Only if we go unprepared, Strand replied, pulling up a stream of data that flared across the laser plasma display. The light painted his face in icy blues and harsh reds. Each line of intercepted tribunal communication was a knife of proof. They don't know we've been listening for years. They don't know we've mapped their meeting place from the inside. They don't know we've already buried our hooks in their systems. And when they realize it'll be too late to erase us quietly, Holt exhaled through his nose, the smell of oil and dust clinging to his uniform. If we're doing this, we'll need every node active. I've got half a dozen microfeeds already seated inside Central Station. They'll pass for standard relay maintenance if no one looks too closely. He tapped his temple, streaking grease over his skin. But once we light them up, there's no hiding. They'll know someone's tampered with their sanctum. Rurik finally moved, the creak of his combat vest audible in the silence. Then we hold long enough to be heard. Doesn't matter if they like what we say, only that they can't deny it after. His words were measured, his tone unshaken, the calm of a man who had seen brutality and knew when it was unavoidable. Strand nodded, feeling the heat of resolve burning through the tension that had threatened to choke the room. This isn't about surviving the chamber. It's about changing the verdict. They want to brand us as a threat? Then we show them why the team fell quiet, the air thick with the scent of sweat and circuitry. Outside the reinforced walls, distant thunder rolled through the coastal city that shielded their underground hub, and each rumble felt like a clock counting down. Eldon broke the silence, his voice soft but sharp with urgency. I can get the data out, every broadcast, every extermination order we've captured, every record of their cleansing campaigns. But the only way it matters is if we stand in front of them and force them to watch while it plays. His fingers hovered over the console, trembling slightly. If I fail, everything we've built dies here in the dark. Strand's gaze hardened, and he placed a hand on Eldon's shoulder, the rough fabric of his sleeve carrying the weight of command. Then you won't fail. Not because it's impossible, but because you know what's at stake. They've silenced entire species. If we're erased, the galaxy never hears the truth. You've carried that weight long enough. Now we carry it with you. Holt smirked faintly, wiping his hands with a rag that reeked of solvents. We're betting everything on turning their own trial against them. Sounds like the kind of gamble I was born for. Rurik's eyes flicked toward Strand. And if they try to silence us before you speak? Strand answered without hesitation, his voice sharper than the crack of lightning above ground. Then they'll learn we came armed with more than words. The command chamber fell into another silence, but it was no longer the silence of dread. It was the silence of men who had stepped past the point of doubt. They heard the storm outside as if it roared through their own chests, and they smelled the salt of the ocean that seeped through ventilation shafts, mixing with the bite of overheated circuits. Their skin prickled with the heat of overworked machines. Their eyes burned from sleepless study, and their hearts pounded with the clarity of knowing there was no retreat left. The trial of species awaited them, and for the first time in its long, unchallenged history, someone uninvited was coming. "Stay in step. Don't draw eyes," Strand ordered in a hushed tone, his voice sharp, enough to cut through the constant murmur of arriving delegates. The docking concourse of Syndrel stations stretched before them, an immense corridor of stone-colored alloy and reinforced glass, thrumming with the movement of species from every known system. The air was thick with layered scents. Brine from aquatic envoys dripping seawater onto the polished floor, pungent spices from avian traders carrying cloth-wrapped parcels, even the faint musk of reptilian guards breathing in short, controlled bursts. 100 languages collided in the air, each translated imperfectly by station relays, producing a ceaseless static of declarations and threats. Strand adjusted the stiff collar of his borrowed uniform and guided his men through the crowd. Their cargo harnesses dug into their shoulders, straps slick against the sweat already forming from the press of bodies and the heat of overhead lamps. Their clothing marked them as contracted laborers, indistinguishable among the thousands of workers funneling shipments into the tribunal's inner levels. The deception felt fragile, but the sheer density of motion gave them cover. Draven Holt walked just behind him, carrying a sealed crate whose weight forced his arms to strain. He muttered under his breath, keeping his tone tight enough that only Strand heard. "These bastards layered security 3 checkpoints deep. One wrong blink and we'll be stripped bare." "Keep your focus," Strand replied without turning his head. His eyes tracked the movements of a patrol unit advancing from the left, insectoid creatures whose armored legs clicked against the flooring. They scanned arrivals with handheld devices, the beams throwing harsh red streaks over the crowd. Strand slowed his pace to fall in behind a delegation of towering mammalians hauling ceremonial relics, using their size as a shield. Rurik Van, towering and broad-shouldered even without armor, moved with deliberate calm, his hand always near the fastening of his belt where a compact blade was hidden. His eyes darted across exits, guard rotations, and ceiling-mounted cameras. Every detail imprinted itself in his mind as if he were drawing a map with his gaze. His breathing remained steady, a soldier's rhythm, but Strand knew beneath it lived a readiness for sudden blood. The checkpoint loomed. The smell of sterilizers bit into their nostrils as they neared, and the low vibration of machinery beneath the floor tremored through their boots. Strand felt the weight of the moment pressing into his spine. A rejection here meant capture, and capture meant Earth's annihilation before a word could be spoken. He tightened his grip on the data rod hidden in his belt seam, the thin strip of alloy that carried the evidence of countless exterminations. Eldon Marr stood at the rear, his eyes lowered, posture slouched as though exhaustion was his only companion. He whispered in measured breaths, feeding quiet updates from the concealed transmitter pressed to his ear. "Node 2 live. Relay spine cycling on schedule. Doors syncing with signal." His words trembled slightly, not from doubt but from the strain of threading invisible wires through a hostile fortress. The insectoid guard raised its scanner toward Strand, lenses gleaming under the harsh lights. The device whirred, beams grazing across his chest, pausing for a moment longer than expected. Strand's jaw locked, and he held the guard's stare without flinching. The machine chimed and the light flickered green. The guard twitched its limbs in dismissal, already moving toward the next laborer. Strand exhaled quietly through his nose, guiding his men forward as though nothing had passed. Once clear, Holt let out a shaky laugh, quickly silenced when Strand's eyes cut back with a warning glare. "Sorry," Holt muttered, adjusting his crate. Could feel my ribs ready to crack under that look. Discipline now, relief later, Strand said. His words carried no anger, only the blunt necessity of command. They pressed deeper into the station. The walls grew smoother, polished to a cold sheen, and banners bearing the insignia of galactic powers draped down from ceiling arches. The temperature shifted, air becoming cooler, tinged faintly with antiseptic. Overhead, the illumination dimmed to a steadier glow, giving the corridors a sense of ceremonial gravity. Eldon spoke again, voice barely audible. Outer feeds are patched. They don't see us yet. Once we reach the inner lift, we'll be ghosts in their own archives. Rurik's head tilted slightly, eyes catching movement ahead. Two guards with segmented armor blocked the lift access, their bodies rigid, weapons displayed openly as warnings. The crate Holt carried would not pass unnoticed here. Strand weighed the moment, his throat tightening as he tasted copper at the back of his mouth. Options were dwindling. Follow my lead, Strand murmured. He strode forward, back straight, gaze set with the authority of someone who belonged. He lifted his arm, flashing a forged identity strip against the guard's sensors. The strip pulsed once with false light, the product of years Holt had spent studying tribunal formats. The guard paused, lenses narrowing, then shifted aside without speaking. The lift doors opened with a heavy hiss, releasing a gust of colder air carrying the faint mineral tang of recycled water. The humans stepped inside, the doors closing with a finality that rang in Strand's chest like a tolling bell. Inside the confined space, Holt set down his crate, rolling his shoulders with a grunt. We're inside their throat. One wrong swallow and we're done. Eldon's lips twitched, a nervous attempt at humor. Then let's make sure they choke. Strand looked at each man in turn, studying the sweat streaking Rurik's brow, the grease still marking Holt's skin, the exhaustion etched into Eldon's eyes. These were not perfect soldiers. They were men, carrying the unbearable weight of their world's survival. The moment bound them together more than any oath. The lift descended, vibrations rattling through their bodies, the sensation like standing on trembling earth before an unseen storm. Strand closed his eyes briefly, feeling the cool metal panel against his back, listening to the rhythmic hiss of ventilation and the distant echoes of machinery grinding in the depths. When the doors opened again, they faced the tribunal's inner level. The floor stretched wide, polished until it reflected the glow of towering heads-up displays, projecting arrivals, schedules, and security notices in shifting alien scripts. Delegations moved in choreographed streams, escorted by guards whose weapons glimmered in the artificial light. Every step forward was another gamble, but Strand's expression never faltered. From here on, he said, voice low but unyielding, every breath counts. We are not here to beg. We are here to stand. His men nodded silently, their resolve etched across their strained faces. They moved into the current of beings flowing toward the heart of judgment, blending into the tide while carrying with them the truth sharp enough to shatter empires. Eyes up. Doors are opening, Strand muttered, his words a clipped warning as the corridor spilled them into the tribunal's heart. The chamber unfolded before them like a coliseum carved from polished stone and reinforced alloys. Tier upon tier of delegates sat in curved rows, their garments shimmering with dyes and fabrics drawn from 100 different worlds. Overhead, heads-up displays streamed data in layered alien scripts. Glowing symbols suspended in columns of shifting light. The air carried an edge of disinfectant mingled with the musk of too many bodies packed together, sharp enough to sting the nose. Beneath the scent came the faint tang of burned oils from ceremonial torches that hissed at the perimeter, releasing an acrid warmth that clung to the back of the throat. The humans crossed the floor with measured steps. Their boots tapped against the polished surface, echoing faintly through the enormous hall. Strand felt the pressure of countless eyes turning their way, the weight of scrutiny pressing on his chest. His pulse quickened, though his face remained locked in command. Holt's grip tightened around the crate he carried, knuckles blanching, while Eldon walked with lowered gaze, lips moving soundlessly as he threaded unseen signals into hidden channels. Rurik's broad frame cut an intimidating line behind them, silent and unblinking, as if daring any who watched to make the first move. The initial reaction rippled like a wave breaking across the tiers. Murmurs surged, then broke into shouts. Alien voices collided, guttural tones, shrill clicks, deep bellows, rising into a storm of outrage. Some delegates stood abruptly, pointing elongated fingers or flashing warning colors across scaled throats. Others recoiled, pressing closer into their seats as if the sight of four humans walking the tribunal floor were an obscenity. A council guard, armored in segmented plates the color of dark stone, advanced with a weapon drawn. Its movements were swift, deliberate, meant to intimidate. The barrel tracked toward Strand's chest, the blue glow inside its core building. Rurik stepped forward instantly, his stance balanced, eyes narrow. "Touch that trigger and you'll never raise it again," he said evenly, his voice low but cutting through the clamor. The guard halted, unnerved not by volume, but by the certainty etched in the soldier's tone. Still, others moved in from the chamber's edges. Their weapons hissed as power cores warmed. The chamber's tension thickened, the overlapping heat of bodies and torches now laced with the metallic tang of charged weaponry. Strand's ears caught the rising hum of power regulators buried beneath the floor, systems awakening in response to threat protocols. Strand raised his voice, carrying it across the uproar. "We stand here not as criminals, but as witnesses." His words thundered in accented standard, clear enough for every translation unit to echo into the ears of the delegates. "You would silence us without hearing what we bring, but what we carry concerns every world seated in this chamber." The uproar faltered for a heartbeat, though weapons remained fixed. Holt glanced at Strand, sweat sliding along his temple. "Any longer and they'll fire." "We need leverage now." His whisper trembled with urgency. Strand gave the faintest nod. Holt shifted the crate to the floor and pressed a concealed switch. Across the chamber, light panels flickered once, then steadied. Oxygen vents shifted output silently, recalibrated by the seated nodes. Strand's ears caught the subtle hitch of breath from aquatic delegates whose gills strained in thinner air, while insectoid envoys twitched uncomfortably as humidity shifted against their needs. The changes weren't lethal, but immediate enough to make the room understand. Someone controlled their sanctuary. The murmurs returned, sharper this time, tinged with alarm. Delegates glanced upward, scanning for technical failures. Guards barked orders into comms, only to find their voices echoed back through the chamber's speakers in fractured distortion. Eldon looked up briefly, eyes glinting with restrained triumph. His quiet voice flowed through the comm link hidden in his ear. "Nodes are live. Their systems answer to us." A delegate of towering stature, flesh marked by streaks of bioluminescent blue, slammed both fists against the railing of his tier. His booming voice filled the chamber. "Remove them! This intrusion is an abomination." Strand's reply cut him down before momentum could gather. "What's abomination is what you've hidden. Entire worlds erased under the tribunal's seal. Species extinguished for resources, not for safety. We've seen your orders. We've intercepted your directives. And now, so will they." Gasps rippled across the seats. Holt pressed another command, and the heads-up displays above the chamber changed. Instead of tribunal schedules, intercepted communications filled the screens. Lines of text in alien glyphs, voice recordings captured from encrypted relays, even footage of fleets burning planets stripped bare. The displays washed the chamber in blue light, the cries of the destroyed echoing through the speaker system. Delegates shouted over one another, disbelief crashing into fury. Some rose to condemn Strand, others stared in silence, horror etched into their eyes. One insectoid representative clutched the rail so tightly its forelimbs cracked under strain. Another mammalian delegate staggered back into his seat, mouth open in wordless shock. A guard rushed toward the humans again, weapon raised. Rurik intercepted him mid-step, a swift motion snapping the weapon from his grip. The guard reeled as Rurik pressed the barrel back against his chest. His words were delivered like stone. "Stand down." The silence after his command carried more weight than the violence itself. The guard froze, chest rising and falling rapidly, mandibles twitching in hesitation. Strand stepped forward into the open center of the tribunal floor, the eyes of the chamber drawn unavoidably to him. "You believed Earth would burn unnoticed. You believed we had no seat, No voice, no shield. Yet here we stand, and here we speak. The evidence is before you. Deny it if you can. His voice thundered, his every syllable slamming against the walls. Eldon's voice whispered faintly through their comms, barely controlled. They're panicking, Ivo. Their channels are flooding with demands. They don't know what's stable anymore. Strand's chest rose and fell with a steady rhythm as he met the glares of hundreds of species. The chamber had turned hostile, but fear now mingled with anger, and in that fracture lay the opening humanity needed. Holt's jaw clenched as he muttered under his breath. We've got their attention. Now let's see if we can keep it before they decide to erase us anyway. The tribunal's sanctity had been shattered. Humanity, uninvited, stood inside the fortress of judgment, and the fortress itself no longer answered to its masters. Run it now, Strand commanded, his voice reverberating through the chamber with the finality of a blade unsheathed. Eldon Marr's fingers moved swiftly over the console pad strapped to his wrist. The hidden relays embedded in the station's infrastructure came alive at his touch. The heads-up displays hanging over the tribunal flickered, their scripted schedules collapsing into static before reforming into streams of intercepted tribunal communiques. The glow washed the chamber in stark light, bathing every delegate in lines of truth they could no longer bury. The first message was blunt, stripped of ceremony. Authorization to cleanse, Sector 12 approved, deploy sterilization fleet, full asset recovery required before eradication. The translation units caught every syllable, feeding them into the ears of horrified delegates. Murmurs broke into shouts as the recordings piled one atop another. A voice recording followed, guttural yet clear. Civilian populations should not be informed. Complete silence ensures compliance from dependent systems. The chamber erupted with gas. Strand stood unmoving in the storm, his gaze steady, his breathing even. His ears caught the sharp intake of air from aquatic envoys, whose throats clicked in disbelief, the hissing protests of reptilian delegates rising like steam, the metallic scrape of insectoid limbs against railing as their representatives leaned forward in agitation. The chamber's scents shifted too. Sweat, oils, and the faint acrid tang of burning torches thickened under the weight of collective fear. Draven Holt knelt by the crate, pulling free a secondary feed rod, his voice pitched low so only his comrades heard. This is heavier than anything we rehearsed. Once they see it all, we'll be marked men. Rurik Van stood beside him, one hand resting lightly on the grip of his concealed blade. His tone was calm, though his eyes never left the guards edging closer. Marked already. Better to be remembered as the ones who forced them to watch. The heads-up displays shifted again, spilling raw visuals. Grainy images captured fleets descending on worlds, firestorms rising from shattered atmospheres. The recordings showed not war, but extermination. Unarmed cities drowned in fire, ships scuttled while their escape pods were disabled by remote command. On one screen, a cluster of children clung to one another inside a ruined shelter before the feed cut to static. Strand's voice thundered into the cacophony. This is your tribunal. This is what you defend. Entire peoples erased not for danger, but for access, water, minerals, labor routes. You tell yourselves these actions preserve balance. In truth, they preserve only your dominion. His words shook with controlled fury, a fury honed into clarity. Counselor Threx rose from the central tier, his scaled body gleaming under the chamber lights. His eyes burned with rage, his voice carrying above the tumult. Lies, fabrications stolen and twisted. These primitives wield scraps of stolen data and dare present them as judgment. Holt barked back, louder than intended, his frustration erupting. Scraps? You call millions burned alive scraps? His shout cracked the air, silencing part of the chamber by sheer force of emotion. He caught himself, chest heaving, before stepping back into control. Strand gave him a sharp glance, a warning to keep their edge disciplined. Eldon's voice broke in, urgent, almost frantic. They're cross-checking in real time. Some already recognize the signatures, fleet identifiers, command, codes. They know it's authentic. Sweat streaked down his temple. his body trembling from the mental strain of keeping their hijacked nodes hidden from counter-intrusion. Strand sees the opening, his tone quieter now, drawing the chamber into his words. You don't have to believe me. Look at your own records. Ask yourselves why entire sectors were silenced while resources flowed unimpeded to the same empires who now demand our erasure. The pattern is undeniable, and you know it. A delegate of avian descent rose shakily from his seat, feathers bristling as his voice cracked. My ancestors vanished 3 cycles ago. You told us a plague consumed them. These files show fleets launched under your seals. You killed them. His cry reverberated with anguish. A wound reopened in public. The chamber fractured further. Some shouted for immediate removal of the humans, their voices tinged with panic. Others demanded answers from their own leadership. Guards faltered, weapons wavering as they realized the chamber no longer presented a united enemy, but a maelstrom of accusations. The sensory barrage grew. The shrill cries of overlapping tongues, the bitter taste of recycled air gone stale from overtaxed systems, the heat of torchlight clashing with the cold light of projected evidence. Rurik leaned toward Strand, speaking in a controlled murmur. They're tearing at each other. Keep them focused on what matters or they'll turn on us just to shut it down. Strand nodded once, then raised his voice again. Earth was listed for extermination because we refused to kneel. We were not invited here because you wanted us dead before we could speak, but now every world represented has heard the truth. What happens next is not about humanity. It is about whether this tribunal still commands loyalty or only fear. Gas turned into silence, the chamber caught in a rare pause. Delegates stared at one another, their expressions shifting from anger to unease as the implications settled. The tribunal was not untouchable. Its crimes were undeniable. Broadcast before its own assembly, Threx struck the railing with his clawed hand, sparks leaping from the contact. His voice was a roar of fury. You dare accuse the tribunal in its own sanctum? You will be purged where you stand, and your planet will burn for this blasphemy. Strand's reply was cold as stone. If you kill us now, every node buried in this station continues the broadcast. Every colony, every dependent world, every fleet crew will see your threats. The trial has already begun, but this time it is not humanity standing accused. The chamber quaked with renewed uproar, yet beneath the storm Strand saw what he needed. Cracks spreading through the council's facade. Holt's lips curled into a grim smile, and Eldon's shoulders sagged with exhausted relief. Rurik shifted his stance, his hand still resting on the hilt of his blade, his eyes watching every guard for the first sign of the violence they all knew could erupt at any second. The evidence of erasures blazed across the heads-up displays, undeniable and searing. The tribunal could not erase what had already been seen, and for the first time in its long reign, it stood on the edge of judgment itself. Look at them. Half the chamber wants us silenced. The other half wants answers, Holt muttered, his words roughened by strain. The uproar did not settle. It split. Delegates screamed across rows, some clawing at railings as if proximity could strengthen their arguments. Others recoiling into their seats with visible dread. The light from the laser plasma displays flickered across their faces, casting every twitch and snarl in blue fire. The sound was deafening, claws drumming, feathers snapping, voices shrieking in different pitches. The sheer weight of noise pressed against Strand's ears until his skull throbbed. Councillor Threx towered at the center, fists striking the rail, every blow sending sparks across the stone floor. These creatures are liars. Do not be swayed by their theft. Every system has enemies that must be cut away for stability. You all know this. Do not let their insolence poison the council. His eyes swept the tears, searching for loyalty that no longer sat firmly in his grasp. Strand let the fury flow around him. He waited for the chamber to draw a breath, then stepped forward into the open. The heat of torches brushed his skin, while the reek of burned oils clung to the back of his throat. You call us liars, then explain why your fleets carry these command codes. He gestured upward, and Eldon triggered another feed. The displays shifted again, showing fleet rosters linked with extermination orders. Specific vessels, documented by name and registry, matched to sectors that no longer existed. Delegates turned their heads, some gasping audibly, others snarling in rage at the sight of their banners tied to the crimes. An avian delegate screamed so loudly his throat split blood, hurling accusations at a neighboring empire. The entire chamber swayed under the weight of betrayal suddenly made visible. Rurik's voice broke through, low and steady, meant for Strand alone. They're not thinking straight. Too much fury in the air. It's going to collapse into fighting. His eyes tracked guards bristling along the walls, claws tightening on grips, eyes darting between hostile delegates and the humans. Holt shifted closer, his expression pale but fierce. If it comes to chaos, they'll use the distraction to cut us down. We need to channel this before it breaks. Strand raised his hand, palm out, his voice sharp as iron. Stop screaming long enough to hear what you already know. This tribunal was meant to guard civilization. Instead, it has murdered it, world after world, under the pretense of balance. If you believe this chamber still has authority, prove it by holding your leaders to account. If you deny it, then this trial is finished, and so is your rule. The words carved through the noise. For a moment, the chamber stilled again, the sudden quiet filled only with labored breaths and the creak of shifting armor. Delegates stared at one another, suspicion and fury reflected in their eyes. The smell of fear was real now, rank and bitter as sweat pooled beneath garments once worn as symbols of grandeur. A slender delegate of reptilian build rose, scales glinting under torchlight. His voice was not a roar, but a hiss sharpened into clarity. He speaks truth. My people lost 2 colonies under the guise of plague. We were told containment failed, yet the codes displayed belonged to fleets seated in this very chamber. They murdered us. His accusations set off another chorus of shouts, this time directed not at humanity, but at the empires called out by name. Threx bellowed in fury, but now his voice fought uphill against disbelief, spreading across the tiers. Do not listen! They twist your grief into weapons. Eldon leaned closer to Strand, whispering with strained urgency. Their private channels are splintering. Some factions are demanding suspension of council authority until an investigation. Others are already accusing each other of sabotage. This is working, but it's unstable. One push too far, and they'll tear each other apart before the truth settles. Strand answered in a voice meant for his men alone. Then we give them something they cannot ignore, but not enough to ignite war inside the chamber. His gaze swept upward. Hold the worst until they understand. The displays dimmed slightly, leaving only a handful of files frozen in light. Just enough evidence to remind the chamber that their crimes were undeniable, yet not so much that panic became uncontrollable. The silence that followed stretched thin, every breath audible. Rurik broke it, speaking not with fury but with brutal calm. You fear us because you cannot control us, but you fear each other more, because now you see what's been done behind closed doors. We didn't come here to beg for survival. We came to show you that you are already on trial. His tone was like stone grinding against steel, the words unyielding, the kind that could not be mistaken for rhetoric. The chamber shifted again, not in sound but in posture. Delegates leaned back, unwilling to meet the eyes of their neighbors. The heat of the torches seemed harsher now, their oily smoke rising like accusation itself. Holt exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing only slightly. They're breaking. Not against us. Against themselves. Strand took another step forward, boots echoing in the open floor. You can execute us here, but you cannot erase what has already been broadcast. Every colony, every dependent world, every fleet will see what we have shown. If you silence us, you prove everything we've revealed. If you recognize us, you admit this tribunal has no power left to kill in secret. The silence deepened, heavy with consequence. Delegates stared at one another, some whispering frantically, others frozen in visible fear of exposure. The air was thick with the mingled sense of sweat, burning oil, and the copper tang of blood from those who had shouted themselves raw. Strand's words had shifted the axis of the chamber. Authority was no longer whole. It was fractured, bleeding, and every fracture spread wider with each heartbeat. Counselor Threx's claws tore into the railing, sparks scattering across the floor as he glared at Strand. His roar came raw with desperation. If we lose order, we lose everything. This chamber exists because fear holds it together. Without fear, the galaxy descends into anarchy. Strand's reply was as cutting as the evidence itself. Then perhaps it is time the galaxy stopped fearing you. The chamber shook with voices again, but this time, the fury was not united against humanity. It was scattered, broken, divided. Strand could feel the ground shifting beneath him, not physically but politically, historically. The tribunal had fractured, and in the fracture, humanity had found its opening. "Move!" Holt barked, his voice breaking through the uproar as the chamber doors burst wide. A wave of mechanical units swept in, sleek, angular constructs with jagged limbs, their cores glowing with contained power. They did not march with ceremony. They surged with purpose, blades snapping open as their scanning lenses locked onto the humans. Delegates recoiled in panic, chairs clattering against the stone floor, the sound mixing with the sharp hiss of charging weapons. The acrid burn of torch smoke thickened as the sudden heat of energy projectors licked the chamber air. Rurik shifted instinctively, drawing his compact blade, his stance wide, steady, his shadow stretching across the tribunal floor. "They've given up on words," he growled, teeth bared. His eyes never left the nearest drone as it lowered its weapon. Strand's pulse hammered against his ribs, yet his face betrayed nothing. He looked to Holt, who had already snapped open the secondary case hidden within their crate. Inside, compact emitters gleamed under the harsh chamber light. Holt's fingers trembled only once before he steadied them. "Fields tuned." They built those drones to rely on overlapping guidance circuits. "Let's see how they like a blackout." The first drone fired, a searing lance of energy scorching across the floor, slicing a black scar into polished stone. The impact rattled through Strand's legs, heat rising in a wave that left the bitter taste of scorched minerals on his tongue. Delegates screamed, their cries echoing off the chamber walls as they scrambled backward. "Now!" Strand shouted. Holt slammed the trigger, and the emitters roared to life. The chamber was drowned in a sudden pulse, an invisible wave that struck with the sound of shattering glass. Drones convulsed, their limbs twitching violently, lights flickering before plunging into darkness. One collapsed entirely, its frame collapsing with a crash that sent sparks across the floor. The smell of overheated circuitry filled the air, pungent and biting, mixing with the smoke from the torches. Delegates gasped and shrieked as their personal augmentations failed. One insectoid guard dropped his weapon, claws trembling uncontrollably as his neural rig went dark. Another, reptilian in form, fell to his knees, eyes rolling back as his exosuit froze and locked. The chamber devolved into chaos, not from humanity's collapse, but from the sudden stripping of the Council's own superiority. Rurik seized the moment. He lunged toward a drone still twitching, its systems sputtering but not entirely dead. His blade drove through its core with a sharp crack, the shock sending vibrations up his arm. Sparks burned across his skin, the stench of seared lubricant filling his nostrils. He ripped the blade free, stepping back with steady control. "Clear," he muttered, though his chest heaved with the force of exertion. Strand raised his voice above the cries of panic. "You arm this chamber against unarmed men? This is your justice? Drones and assassins against witnesses who came with evidence?" His words thundered across the tiers, carried by the chamber's own acoustics, now stripped of order. Threx's voice bellowed in fury, even as the counselor himself staggered under the collapse of environmental stabilizers. "They cripple our defenses with trickery. Kill them. End this farce." His claws tore grooves into the railing, his face twisted in rage. Eldon leaned into Strand's side, sweat running into his eyes. His voice cracked with strain. "The signal held. Broadcasts still live. Every system tethered to this station is seeing this. Even their attempt to kill us." His lips trembled as exhaustion dragged at him, but his hands never left the relay strapped to his wrist. Delegates turned, faces etched in fear. Some pressed their bodies against walls as if expecting fire to rain upon them. Others screamed accusations, pointing at empires whose fleets had been caught on display only minutes before. The chamber was a storm of sound and stench. Smoke, sweat, burned wires, the tang of scorched stone, all pressing together in suffocating heat. Rurik moved back to Strand's side, blades still dripping sparks from the destroyed drone. His voice was flat, stripped of emotion. They've seen what it looks like when the tribunal's weapons fail. That's all they'll remember. Holt closed the emitter case, his hands shaking. We bought seconds, maybe minutes. If they recover control, we won't get another chance. Strand looked at the shattered drones, the failed guards, the delegates clutching at themselves in confusion. He stepped forward again, his boots crunching against the fragments of destroyed machinery. You brought war into your chamber, said, voice steady, deliberate. And you lost. Not to fleets, not to armies, to 4 men you dismissed as nothing. He let the silence linger for a breath before continuing. If you kill us now, the galaxy will remember you fell in your own house. The chamber's uproar stilled into a grim quiet. Delegates exchanged looks not of unity, but of fear, suspicion, and resentment. Some lowered their eyes, unwilling to meet Strand's gaze, while others whispered frantically into comm units that no longer answered. Threx roared again, desperate, his authority cracking. They will destroy order itself. Without this tribunal, you descend into chaos. Strand's answer came cold. The chaos began the moment you silenced the First World. We are not the end of order. We are its proof the chamber was broken. Delegates shivering in fear, drones strewn like corpses across the stone floor, guards incapacitated by their own technology. Holt stood panting beside his sealed case, Eldon slumped but still clinging to the relay, Rurik standing unyielding with blade in hand, and Strand, unbowed, stared down the council whose authority had shattered in the space of a single broadcast. The trial was no longer theirs. It belonged to the galaxy watching beyond these walls. Every second we stand here, the feed spreads further. Eldon rasped, his voice dry, worn to threads from the strain. His eyes darted over the readings pulsing across his wrist display. Tiny symbols confirming the broadcast had leapt beyond the station, carried into outer networks. They can't stop it now. The tribunal chamber lay in ruinous silence after the drone collapse, the floor littered with fragments of shattered constructs. The oily smoke from their burned circuits drifted low, mixing with the heavy scent of sweat and scorched stone. Delegates huddled in their tears, some clutching broken devices, others whispering frantically, their voices cracking under the weight of panic. The heat from the torches licked at Strand's skin, mingling with the sting of ash on his tongue. Strand took 2 measured steps forward, the sound of his boots against stone puncturing the hush. His gaze swept across the tiers, locking onto faces that flinched when caught. His voice carried clear and unshaken. You wanted Earth erased in silence. Instead, your crimes are echoing across every system tethered to this station. Colonies, freighters, outposts, all watching. This is no longer your chamber. This is theirs, Counselor Threx snarled, his deep-set eyes glowing under the chamber light. His scaled fingers gouged lines into the railing. Do not pretend victory, human. When this is finished, your world will burn. We have fleets enough to scour your oceans, your cities, your skies. Recognition here means nothing when fire rains from orbit. His voice cracked with fury, but beneath it, fear trembled like a loose string ready to snap. Holt laughed under his breath, the sound harsh, unrefined, more bitterness than humor. He wiped a streak of grease from his cheek with the back of his hand. You've already lost, Threx. The galaxy saw your fleets fall silent when 4 men with hand-built emitters shut down your war machines. You can torch our planet, sure, but you'll never silence what's already out there. Every dependent system under your boot will rise the second they know you can bleed. Rurik leaned on the wreck of a drone, blade still clutched in his hand, his stance as steady as stone. His voice rumbled low, stripped of flourish. You measure power in fleets. We measure it in what survives once your fleets fail. You couldn't hold this room against us. How will you hold the galaxy? The chamber stirred at those words. Delegates shifted, their feathers ruffling, scales twitching, mandibles clicking nervously. Some lowered their eyes, others glanced toward their rivals, suspicion thickening like smoke. Strand felt the shift like a current through water. Fear no longer aimed solely at humanity, but turning inward, directed at the tribunal itself. Eldon straightened with effort, his face pale, sweat cutting rivulets down his jaw. He raised his voice, weak but urgent. We didn't come here to beg for a seat. We came because you already condemned us. You forced us into this chamber. Now you face the truth you've hidden for centuries. Your colonies will see this. Your soldiers will see this. The lies are finished. His chest heaved, every word dragged from a body at its edge. Threx slammed his clawed hand down again, sparks scattering as stone cracked. You will not dictate terms. This tribunal was forged in blood long before your kind left its cradle. You are nothing. Strand cut him off, stepping closer to the center. Then prove it. His tone was calm, almost surgical. Kill us here, in front of them all. Show every world that the Council fears 4 men enough to send drones into its own sanctum. Show them you are so terrified of truth that you must slaughter it on the floor of your own chamber. His hand rose, pointing toward the heads-up displays still cycling evidence. Do it, and the galaxy will know exactly what you are. The silence that followed stretched taut. Delegates stared, some visibly shaken, others frozen in indecision. The flicker of the displays painted their faces in harsh light, every twitch and tremor exposed. Strand could hear the low hiss of cooling drones, the distant rattle of vents struggling under the stress, the uneven breathing of those who realized history had shifted beneath their feet. Rurik moved closer to Strand's side, speaking softly so only his commander heard. They're breaking. Not toward us. Toward each other, his eyes tracked 2 delegates exchanging venomous whispers, talons pointing across the chamber. Holt's fingers drummed restlessly against the closed emitter case, his knuckles slick with sweat. Push it harder. They're close to splintering. One shove and this place turns into a knife fight. Strand shook his head slightly, his eyes locked on the chamber tiers. No, we don't need blood here. We need judgment. He turned his full voice back on the assembly. You claim this chamber exists to safeguard civilizations. Then safeguard one. Recognize Earth. Let this trial prove you still hold legitimacy, or deny it, and let the galaxy decide who rules in your absence. For the first time, silence did not come from shock. It came from hesitation. Delegates leaned back in their seats, whispering furiously into the ears of aides, their eyes darting toward rivals. The air tasted of fear, sharp and coppery, layered with the bitterness of burned oil and sweat. The torches hissed as their flames bent in the recycled air currents, smoke curling overhead. Threx seethed, but his words no longer thundered. They cracked, raw with desperation. If you recognize them, you unravel the order that binds us. Every world will question. Every colony will rebel. You cannot allow it. Strand met his glare without flinching. You unraveled it the moment you lied. We only revealed the thread. The delegates erupted again, but this time the noise was not unified fury. It was fragmentation, arguments, accusations, denials, fear given voice. The tribunal no longer looked like a fortress of authority. It looked like a body convulsing under its own disease. Strand stood in its center, calm, unyielding, as the ultimatum he had laid settled like a blade over their necks. The trial no longer judged humanity. Humanity judged the trial. Vote, Strand demanded, his voice cutting through the chaos like a steel edge through cloth. The chamber froze in a brittle silence. Delegates caught between fear and the crushing awareness that millions beyond these walls were watching. The air was thick with sweat and smoke, and the faint crackle of torches fighting their fuel added a background rhythm to the rising tension. Rurik shifted his stance, boots scraping stone as he scanned the tiers, his blade still stained from the wrecked drone. Holt stood rigid beside the disabled emitters, jaw clenched, eyes darting between Strand and the counselors, as if measuring how much longer the moment could hold before it dissolved into violence. Eldon remained slouched but alert, one hand pressed to his wrist console, his knuckles pale from the pressure of keeping the signal alive. Counselor Threx's voice thundered across the tiers, louder than any other, though frayed with desperation. They demand recognition by extortion. If we yield, this tribunal loses all meaning. No world will follow rulings shaped by terror. His claws raked the rail, sparks scattering as though even the stone resisted his grip. He glared down at the humans, hatred twisting his scaled features. Crush them here now and reassert control. Strand answered without raising his tone, yet every word carried weight. Control is gone. Fear kept this council in power, but fear has changed direction. If you kill us, the galaxy sees proof you have no legitimacy left. If you recognize us, you still stand as arbiters, exposed, wounded, but alive. This is the only path where you keep even a fragment of authority. His stare locked with Threx, unblinking, unshaken. Choose! The chamber erupted again, but this time not in violence. Voices clashed as factions turned on each other openly. One mammalian delegate pounded his chest as he shouted for investigation into past exterminations. A feathered envoy screeched that acknowledgement of Earth was better than rebellion from half their colonies. An insectoid representative chattered in panic that failure to adapt meant civil war spreading across sectors. The sound was overwhelming. Screams, arguments, bodies shuffling in agitation. But beneath it all ran the thundering pulse of inevitability. Rurik leaned slightly toward Strand, his words pitched for him alone. They're cornered animals. Desperate. If they don't vote now, they'll start tearing each other apart. Strand gave a faint nod. He raised his hand to Eldon, who hesitated, sweat dripping down his face. Open the channel wider, Strand ordered. Make sure every dependent colony hears this deadlock. Force them to feel the weight. Eldon's fingers worked over the relay with trembling urgency. A low, static ripple spread across the chamber as the broadcast signal strengthened. Delegates stiffened, realizing their words were no longer contained within the chamber. They were spilling into the networks of entire civilizations. Holt exhaled through clenched teeth, his tone edged with grim satisfaction. They wanted silence. Now every colony they've ever ruled is listening to them choke on their own lies. The pressure mounted until the chamber itself seemed to shiver under the strain. Finally, a reptilian delegate stood, his scales flashing with warning patterns as his voice rang out. I call for recognition, not to honor them, but to salvage this council from collapse. His declaration cracked the dam. Others followed, some shouting in agreement, others spitting their reluctant acceptance, their voices forced by the reality that rebellion already stirred beyond these walls. Not all agreed. Threx screamed defiance, his claws tearing another gouge into the railing, but his roar drowned beneath the growing chorus. Recognition surged, not out of generosity, but as the only lifeline left to preserve authority. The vote was cast. The tribunal recognized humanity as a species withstanding. Silence crashed down, heavier than any noise before. Delegates slumped back into their seats, drained and broken, their postures betraying defeat. The smoke hung heavy, the chamber air sour with the mingling scents of sweat, scorched circuits, and torch fuel. Strand stood at the center, shoulders squared, his men arrayed behind him. He had not smiled once, and he did not now. This was no victory to revel in. It was survival carved out by exposing corruption so deep it could never be unseen. Threx spat his final venom, his voice hoarse but still burning. You have doomed us all. You've planted rebellion in every system. You'll drown in the fire you've unleashed. Strand finally allowed a trace of emotion to break through, a quiet defiance carried not in rage but in resolve. We didn't bring rebellion. You did when you lied, when you murdered, when you silenced. We only showed the galaxy what it already lived under, and they will decide what happens next. Eldon lowered his relay, exhaustion pulling his shoulders down. His voice was nearly gone, but his words carried weight. Signals complete. Every second of this trial is already archived beyond their reach. Holt wiped sweat and grime from his forehead, his grin hollow but fierce. Then they can never bury it. Not now. Not ever. Rurik's blade slid back into its sheath with a hiss, his eyes scanning the chamber one last time. They'll hate us for this, but they'll fear each other more. That's what will keep us alive. Strand lifted his gaze to the tiers of beaten delegates, his final words cutting into the silence. You called this the trial of species. You thought it meant judgment for us. But today, it became judgment of you. And we did not need an invitation to stand here. The torches hissed as they burned lower, their smoke curling toward the ceiling. Delegates avoided one another's eyes, their whispers already turning to self-preservation. Outside the chamber, across hundreds of systems, millions who had never seen this hall were now watching it collapse. For the first time, the council feared its own colonies more than the unknown species it sought to erase. Strand turned to his men, each battered in body and spirit but unbroken. They walked from the tribunal floor without escort, their boots echoing against stone as the chamber sat paralyzed. They did not need applause, nor could they expect mercy. What they carried out was heavier than weapons or data. It was the certainty that humanity had forced itself into history, uninvited yet undeniable. When the doors closed behind them, the tribunal still quaked in chaos. But the galaxy beyond was already different. The old order had fractured, its grip loosened by evidence no blade could cut away. Earth's survival was no longer in question. It was embedded in every transmission, every whispered rebellion, every colony now daring to imagine a council brought to its knees. Humanity had walked into the trial uninvited. Humanity had walked out recognized, and nothing in the stars would ever be the same again. If this trial shook you to the core, smash that subscribe button for more thrilling HFY stories. Now we want to hear from you. If humanity had a single chance to walk uninvited into an alien council, what truth would you throw in? Their faces to turn the galaxy upside down? Drop your answer in the comments. We read every single one. Thanks for watching Stellar HFY, where strategy doesn't just win battles, it rewrites history. See you in the next story.